I saw my perfect tech giant parents throw a metal box off the Golden Gate Bridge at midnight. They thought they'd drowned the secret about my autistic brother's death. But the shocking truth I found inside changed everything. I never thought I would witness such a scene. Not from them, my parents. Evelyn and Thomas Sterling were architects of perfection in San Francisco. They weren't old money, but their wealth, built on groundbreaking tech and strategic finance, bought them a reputation far heavier than any ancient name. We lived in a glass house high in the hills, a place of minimalist design and maximum visibility. Everything about the Sterling life, from the curated art collection to my mother's flawless philanthropic appearances, was a testament to public image and flawless execution. They dealt in innovation, logic, and billions, and they demanded that same sterile perfection from their family. My name is Finn Sterling. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a data analyst. My job is to find the truth hidden in overwhelming complexity, which is perhaps why I've always been the observer, the outlier in my own family. I respect facts and despise the emotional noise they often bring. But beneath my professional detachment lay a core of unresolved grief, a wound left by my younger brother, Caleb. Caleb was the quiet genius of the family, 5 years my junior. He was brilliant, a mathematical prodigy who saw the world not in colors, but in patterns and logic gates. But Caleb was also severely autistic. For my parents, Caleb's genius was a source of pride, a marketable asset. His autism, however, was a threat, a crack in the facade of their genetic and professional perfection. It was a detail meticulously erased from our public narrative. They shielded him, yes, but not out of love. They shielded him to protect the Sterling brand. Caleb passed away 3 weeks ago. The official cause of death was listed as a tragic, unforeseen accident related to his experimental technology lab, but the details were vague and tightly controlled by Thomas Sterling. The funeral was a calculated, muted affair, a private gathering where grief was contained, and any hint of Caleb's neurodiversity was strictly forbidden. On the night I saw them, a dense fog had rolled in from the Pacific, swallowing the city lights. I was driving back to my small apartment in the financial district, unable to sleep, haunted by the forced quiet of Caleb's funeral. I saw their sleek black sedan parked near a secluded viewpoint overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. I pulled over, my curiosity overcoming my numbness. My parents stepped out. Mother Evelyn, usually draped in elegance, was shivering in a dark, oversized coat. Father Thomas, the picture of composure, was rigid, his face pale against the backdrop of the fog-shrouded bay. Thomas carried a small, heavy metal box. It wasn't a casket. It was the kind of industrial lockbox Caleb often used to store his prototypes. I watched from the shadow of an oak tree as they walked toward the railing. There was no ritual, no prayer, just a terrifying sense of cold finality. Thomas looked left, then right, ensuring the coast was clear. Then, with a grunt of effort, he swung the box over the railing. The heavy object plunged into the dark water of the San Francisco Bay, making almost no sound against the roar of the tide and the endless hum of the bridge. They got back into the car and drove away without saying a word to each other. I stood there, chilled to the bone, not from the fog, but from the sudden, terrifying realization my perfect parents had just tried to drown something unforgivable, something connected to Caleb. They hadn't just buried a son, they were trying to bury the truth about him. I knew in that moment that the pristine facade of the Sterling family was built on a horrifying, silent sin. The horror of that night didn't leave me. It settled deep into my bones. But to understand why my parents would commit such an act, you need to understand the kingdom they ruled and the constraints they placed upon the only true light we ever had, Caleb. Caleb was 5 years younger than me, but infinitely wiser. He was a savant, a mathematical prodigy who achieved things in his teens that most PhDs only dream of. The press called him a boy wonder. a testament to the Sterling bloodline. But beneath the accolades and Thomas Sterling's proud facade was a deeply complex truth. Caleb's brilliance was inextricably linked to his severe autism. For Thomas and Evelyn, Caleb was an asset that needed managing. His genius was celebrated. His challenges were meticulously concealed. He never attended public school. His interviews were carefully choreographed, scripted to hide any social discomfort. He was a silent prisoner in our glass house. The world saw the perfect, if eccentric, genius. Only I saw the child who hid under his custom-built desk when the noise of the city became too much. The brilliant mind trapped in a body that couldn't cope with the casual chaos of human interaction. I was his interpreter, his defender, and his only true friend. When I was young, I learned to read the subtle shifts in his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands, the signals no one else bothered to decipher. While my father grilled me about data models and market projections, Caleb and I would retreat to his lab, a soundproof sanctuary my parents had built deep in the basement. There, surrounded by humming servers and holographic displays, Caleb was truly himself. He didn't just code, he built worlds. His crowning obsession, however, wasn't a financial application or a security system that would bolster the Sterling fortune. It was something personal. Something born out of his own suffering, a massive medical diagnostics program. Caleb saw the imperfections in current medical data, the misdiagnoses, the delayed treatments, the gaps caused by human error. He wanted to create a system of pure, unbiased medical logic, a program that could predict and diagnose illnesses years before they manifested. He poured his life into it, driven by a desire to fix the one thing he couldn't control, the vulnerability of the human body. This was the source of my parents' great dilemma. The program was revolutionary, a world changer, but it required the disclosure of deeply personal, messy medical data that could potentially expose Caleb's full neurological profile to the public. To Thomas, this was an unacceptable risk. Releasing it meant exposing the one flaw in the Sterling genetics, shattering the image of the perfect family. The tension in the glass house escalated in the year before Caleb's death. My father demanded that Caleb modify the program, stripping it of its public-facing, vulnerable elements, and instead turning it into a proprietary system for financial gain. "We sell the logic, Caleb." I remember Thomas saying at a silent, sterile dinner, his voice cold and precise. "We profit from the innovation. We do not disclose weakness." Caleb, usually compliant, pushed back. His voice, typically a monotone, held a rare, fierce passion. "It is meant for the world, Father. It saves lives. It is my truth." Evelyn, my mother, watched, her elegant hands trembling on her wine glass, her eyes darting between father and son. She saw the collision coming, but as always, she chose to silently uphold the facade, prioritizing her husband's ambition over her son's profound moral purpose. I intervened, arguing the moral and human value of Caleb's creation. But Thomas simply dismissed me with contempt. "Your sentimentalism is why you left. This is business. Finn, this is our legacy." It was a fight Caleb couldn't win. He was a genius, but also a child, cornered by the two people who were supposed to protect him. The isolation began to take its toll, and the vibrant glow of his mind started to dim under the suffocating pressure of his own home. The battle over the medical diagnostics program drained Caleb completely. He was used to the isolation, but the constant pressure to corrupt his life's work, to turn a tool of global good into a private, proprietary financial asset was too much for his finely tuned mind. I watched him retreat further, his eyes losing the light that usually shone when he was immersed in code. During those tense final months, Caleb found an unexpected, silent comfort in his old, beloved possessions. Chief among them was a battered, small robot toy, a cheap plastic figure he'd had since he was 6. It was a relic from the pre-Sterling wealth days, before the glass house and the pressure for perfection. He kept it in a heavy, military-grade metal lockbox, the one he used for his most sensitive prototypes, treating it with a reverence he never showed the multi-million-dollar servers in his lab. It was a tangible link to a simpler time, an anchor in the maelstrom of his adult life. But there was another secret Caleb held, one that no one, not even I, fully understood until much later. His program, the one my father demanded be changed, was almost complete. He had been working on a secure protocol, a final act of rebellion designed to publish the code globally, beyond the reach of the sterling financial empire, the moment it was fully operational. He wanted his work to be a true gift to the world, an open-source monument to human vulnerability and resilience. I knew he was under immense stress. I saw the signs of total exhaustion, the sleepless nights, the way he stopped eating. I begged him to leave, to come live with me in my small, inconspicuous apartment where logic and public image didn't rule every breath. "You need to walk away, Caleb," I urged him one evening, whispering through the reinforced door of his lab. "Let the code wait. Let them have their money. We need you to live." Caleb's reply was faint, muffled by the soundproofing, yet utterly determined. "I can't, Finn. This is my legacy. It's the one thing that is truly mine, unbound by their expectations. If I fail, it will be as if I never existed. My life has to mean something real, not just profitable." He saw the sterling name not as a badge of honor, but as a cage of gold and glass, and his medical program was his key to freedom. But that key, that final act of defiance, came at an unforgivable cost. The last time I saw him alive was a cold Tuesday morning. He was sitting at his console, surrounded by glowing screens, his posture unnaturally slumped. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of resignation in his eyes. "Finn," he murmured, "don't let them bury the good parts. Promise me. Protect the truth." I promised, my throat tight, believing I was promising to defend the purity of his code against my father's greed. I had no idea that the good parts included more than just algorithms. The very next day, the news arrived like a sterile, horrifying press release. Caleb Sterling was dead. The official story, carefully managed and swiftly delivered by my father's PR team, was that Caleb had suffered a fatal electrical accident while working on a new, highly complex energy prototype. The narrative emphasized his brilliance, mourned the loss to the tech world, and critically never mentioned his autism, his deep-seated struggles, or the medical program that was his true passion. The funeral was a calculated, discreet affair designed to protect the Sterling brand. My parents presented their grief as stoic and private, befitting their perfect image. But I knew my father too well. The excessive control, the rapid narrative, the palpable sense of relief beneath my mother's forced composure, it all screamed of a lie. The accident was too convenient, the resolution too quick. And then came the night I saw them on the Golden Gate Bridge, trying to dispose of that metal lockbox, and I understood they hadn't just lost a son. They had committed a profound betrayal, and were now trying to drown the final, devastating evidence of the life he truly lived. My initial vow to protect Caleb's code instantly transformed into a desperate hunt for the truth, a hunt that began beneath the icy waters of the San Francisco Bay. Caleb's death was handled with the same cold, calculated precision my parents applied to every major financial acquisition. There was no public investigation, no emotional vulnerability, and certainly no mention of the medical program that was his true life's work. Thomas made sure the narrative was tight, a brilliant mind lost to an accidental surge of his own creation, a tragic loss to science, but a clean exit for the Sterling name. But for me, there was no cleanliness, only corrosive suspicion. My grief was interwoven with a rising, toxic certainty that my parents were lying. They had suppressed Caleb's spirit for years, forcing him into a mold that broke him. Had they, in their obsessive pursuit of perfection, finally pushed him too far? I couldn't shake the image of that metal lockbox plunging into the bay. It had been Caleb's fortress, the only physical thing he truly guarded. I knew whatever was inside was the key to his final truth. I had to find it. For 2 days, I drove the coastline, staring at the swirling cold water beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. The location was impossible. The tide was relentless, the depth unforgiving. But Caleb had taught me to look beyond the surface, to trust the data, and to find the logic in the chaos. I remembered my parents' calculated movements the way Thomas had eyed the currents. It wasn't an accidental spot. They had chosen a place that seemed to guarantee permanent disappearance. I reached out to an old contact, a salvage expert with a discreet operation in the Sausalito Marina. I fabricated a story about losing a family heirloom, a priceless, irreplaceable antique clock that had fallen into the bay near the bridge. The man, a rough, practical former Navy diver named Gus, was cynical but interested in the high fee I offered. "The bay keeps its secrets, kid," Gus had warned me over a greasy cup of coffee. "And sometimes, secrets are best left where they are. This one can't wait. Gus," I told him, my voice flat. "It's my brother's only trace." I showed him the approximate location based on my recollection of the oak tree and the angle of the drop. Gus deployed a small, remote-operated underwater vehicle ROV equipped with high-resolution sonar. I sat for hours on the deck of his beat-up trawler, watching the sonar feed on a humming screen, my heart pounding a rhythm against the slow, deliberate pinging of the scanner. The ocean floor was a mess of debris, old fishing nets, and discarded history. It felt like searching for a single grain of sand in a desert. Finally, after nearly 12 hours of tense, silent searching, Gus spoke, his voice low. "Hold up. Got something small, metallic. Look square." He brought the ROV closer. On the murky screen, there it was, a heavy, military-grade metal lockbox, snagged between two pieces of old pipeline. It was rusted, covered in seaweed, but undeniably the box Thomas had thrown. It was Caleb's. Gus brought the box up in a specialized retrieval arm. It smelled of brine and rot, heavy and cold. I paid Gus his exorbitant fee, thanking him with a genuine gratitude that surprised even me, and drove the relic straight back to my apartment. The lockbox was sealed by a complex biometric scanner, a security measure only Caleb could have bypassed. For a moment, I felt hopeless. My parents hadn't just tried to drown a secret. They had locked it forever. But then I remembered the promise I made to Caleb. Protect the truth. I pulled out my own gear, a mobile decryption rig I used for my high-level data work. The scanner was complex, but it wasn't unsolvable. I began to work, racing against the internal clock of my own dread, knowing that every minute I spent unlocking the box was a minute my parents believed their secret was safely buried beneath the waters of the Golden Gate. The next 3 hours were a blur of focus, caffeine, and flashing terminal screens. My data analyst skills were finally being used for a purpose that truly mattered. I worked through Caleb's complex security layers, the same layers designed to protect his medical code from corporate espionage. The irony was suffocating. I was hacking into my brother's creation to expose my parents' crime. Finally, with a soft, electronic chime, the biometric scanner yielded. I held my breath, the metal lockbox cold and heavy in my hands. I lifted the lid, ready for anything: a hidden hard drive, a confession letter, a final, horrifying instruction from my parents. What I saw wasn't what I expected, yet it hit me with the emotional force of a physical blow. Resting inside, nestled among a few pieces of foam insulation, was Caleb's battered, small robot toy. It was a cheap, plastic figure he had nicknamed the Sentinel, a gift I'd bought him years ago at a flea market. It represented the simple, unburdened joy of his childhood before the sterling name demanded perfection. Seeing that toy, a relic of his innocence, being treated as contraband to be drowned, was more devastating than any physical evidence. My parents hadn't just murdered a secret. They had tried to erase the last symbol of Caleb's true self. I carefully lifted the Sentinel. Beneath the toy, a small, laminated external memory card was taped to the bottom of the box. This was the real treasure. Caleb hadn't hidden his code in a large server. He had encapsulated it in a tiny, easily concealable data package, trusting his deepest secret to the most inconspicuous object he owned. I slotted the memory card into my reader. Immediately, 2 files appeared. The first was a massive, encrypted file labeled Project Chiron, Final Build. This was it, Caleb's complete medical diagnostics program, the life-saving work my father wanted to suppress. The second file was a short, unencrypted video clip labeled simply F for Finn. My hands shook as I clicked the video open. Caleb's face, pale and strained, filled the screen. He was sitting in his soundproof lab, looking directly into the lens. The recording was dated only 3 hours before his accidental death. Finn. His voice was quiet, a low monotone that sounded utterly weary. If you're watching this, it means they executed the cover-up. It means I failed to publish Chiron myself. He paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. It wasn't an accident. Finn. It was a choice. My diagnosis arrived 2 weeks ago. The reason I fought Father so hard for Chiron is because I knew I was racing the clock. I have stage 4 glioblastoma. Terminal. The only thing that could have detected it earlier was Chiron itself. The room spun. My logic-driven mind struggled to process the information. My brother hadn't died in an accident. He had died from an aggressive, fast-acting brain tumor. Caleb continued, his eyes always so distant now locked in a final, heartbreaking gaze. I am choosing to shut the system down. Finn, I won't let Father use my illness, my death, or my program to protect his image. He would have announced my death as a scientific martyrdom to boost the stock. He would have buried the truth about my autism and the fact that I died from a disease that Chiron could have cured. The metal box contains the Sentinel, the symbol of my truth, and the only copy of the final build. You promised to protect the good parts. Finn, publish Chiron. Don't let my death be a lie. Don't let the sterling name drown the truth anymore. Find a way to make it real. The video ended, leaving me in a silence far more deafening than the roar of the ocean. My father hadn't thrown a crime down the drain. He had thrown away a miracle cure and the final testament of his son, all because he feared the public would learn that the perfect sterling bloodline was flawed by terminal illness and autism. The perfect facade hadn't just been shattered, it had been built on the corpse of my brother's integrity. I knew then that my life was no longer about data analysis. It was about fulfilling Caleb's final, desperate command. The silence in my apartment after Caleb's video ended was profound. My grief for my brother, a grief I had held rigid and logical since his death, finally cracked, replaced by a searing, white-hot fury. My parents, the paragons of technological progress, had sentenced their son to death. Not by direct action, but by suppressing the truth that could have saved him. They feared the diagnosis of glioblastoma and the mention of autism far more than they feared death itself, because those things threatened the sterling image. My initial shock quickly gave way to absolute resolve. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice for Caleb. Justice meant fulfilling his final desperate wish, publishing Project Chiron. The medical diagnostics program was no longer just code. It was Caleb's final, righteous stand against the suffocating lie of our family. I secured the metal box and the memory card inside my most protected vault. My apartment, once just a place to sleep and analyze data, became a command center. I disconnected from all non-essential networks. Every instinct I had as a data analyst screamed one thing: my parents would hunt for this. If they discovered that the box had been retrieved, they would use every resource, their vast network of lawyers, security experts, and financial influence to silence me and bury the code forever. For the next 8 years, my life became a clandestine operation built around 2 goals: decoding and protecting Chiron, and cutting all ties to the Sterling Empire. The decryption process was monumental. Caleb hadn't just used complex algorithms. He had layered the code with personal, idiosyncratic security keys puzzles based on our childhood memories, obscure data points only I, his interpreter, would understand. It was his final trust test. It took me a full year of 16-hour days to fully crack the encryption and stabilize the final build. The magnitude of the program was staggering. It could process and predict medical markers with an accuracy that would fundamentally change global healthcare. It was a true masterpiece, a testament to the beautiful, complex mind my parents had tried to erase. During this time, I executed my quiet separation from the Sterling family. I liquidated my assets linked to their businesses, leaving me with a substantial but clean cache of funds. I changed my residency details and switched to working exclusively on freelance, highly secure data projects that had no connection to San Francisco or the tech giants my father controlled. My communication with Evelyn and Thomas became minimal stiff. Formal exchanges limited to public holidays and controlled by layers of secure messaging. I crafted a narrative for my parents. Finn Sterling, the data analyst, had become disillusioned with the corporate world and was traveling the globe, chasing esoteric data projects. They accepted this easily. It fit their view of me as the eccentric outsider, harmlessly pursuing non-profitable passions. They never suspected I was living just a few states away, dedicating my life to dismantling their legacy of lies. My mother, Evelyn, was the hardest to deal with. Sometimes, her emails carried a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of genuine pain, a fleeting sense of loss that cut through her elegant facade. But she never once asked about Caleb's actual life, only about my father's expectations. Her silence in the face of my father's cover-up was her own form of guilt, an active choice to uphold the perfect image over the truth. My father, Thomas, remained the perfect patriarch. He continued to grow the Sterling fortune, his image untarnished. He believed the metal box and Caleb's secret were resting permanently at the bottom of the bay. He had successfully drowned the truth, and that illusion of control reinforced his belief that his honor, the honor of perfection, was the highest virtue. But I knew the truth was not dead. It was alive, humming on a small server rack in my quiet, nondescript apartment, waiting for the right moment to be released. I was not just protecting the code. I was protecting Caleb's memory, his life, and the profound, life-saving gift he left behind. I was guarding the spark of humanity they had tried so desperately to extinguish. The years I spent decoding and refining Project Chiron were years of quiet, necessary solitude. I knew the moment I released the code, my anonymity would end, and the full force of my parents' protective ambition would turn on me. I had to wait for the perfect moment, a moment that maximized the impact of Caleb's legacy, while minimizing the Sterling family's ability to control the narrative. I wasn't just dealing with complex algorithms. I was dealing with my brother's heart. The code was not merely functional. It was laced with hidden Easter eggs and personal data points that acted as a silent, digital memoir. He had encoded snippets of our childhood conversations, our inside jokes, and even the frustration he felt living under the Sterling facade. It was his way of ensuring that whoever finally released his work understood the profound human cost behind the brilliance. I realized that the physical artifacts were as important as the code. The metal lockbox became a monument to my parents' sin, and the little robot toy, the Sentinel, became a symbol of Caleb's integrity, the part of him they couldn't buy, change, or drown. I kept them locked away, ready to be presented as physical proof when the time came to confront the world and my family. During these years, I became an expert in data privacy and decentralized hosting, realizing that if I published Chiron through any traditional centralized server, my father's lawyers would shut it down within hours, citing intellectual property theft. Caleb's legacy demanded more than that. It demanded pure, global accessibility. I developed a decentralized, open-source publishing framework that would disseminate the Chiron code instantly across thousands of independent servers worldwide. Once released, it could never be recalled. My parents, meanwhile, continued their lives of sterile perfection in San Francisco. Their wealth and influence grew exponentially. They doubled down on their legacy projects, funding massive, highly public tech for health foundations, a grotesque, ironic gesture designed to soothe their own consciences while actively burying the world's most revolutionary diagnostic tool. They often appeared on stage, touting the importance of innovation and transparency, all while maintaining the most elaborate, deadly secret in the family's history. My sporadic calls and visits, always brief and formal, confirmed their continued delusion. My mother, Evelyn, had aged, her elegance hardening into a brittle fragility. She would often comment on how peaceful life was now that my father had resolved the situation with Caleb's accident. She had chosen silence and the preservation of her perfect life over the truth of her son's suffering. My father, Thomas, was the same iron dictator, convinced that his actions, his choice to drown the evidence and frame the death as an honorable scientific mishap, were justified. He had protected the sterling image in his warped moral compass. That was the highest form of duty. But I saw the subtle cracks. Sometimes, when Thomas thought no one was watching, I would catch a fleeting, lost look in his eyes, a momentary shadow of guilt that he immediately smothered with a renewed focus on profit statements. And Evelyn would often stare blankly at the soundproof door of Caleb's old lab, her eyes red, though never wet with tears. They were prisoners of their own perfection, believing the world was fooled, unaware that the one person they dismissed, the quiet data analyst, Finn, held the key to their spectacular, inevitable downfall. I was prepared to live this double life indefinitely, but I knew I couldn't. I was not just Caleb's protector, I was his instrument. I needed a final event, a high-profile platform that would draw maximum public attention and prevent my parents from immediately controlling the damage. The moment had to be strategically chosen, calculated for maximum, irreversible effect. I just needed one final piece of external validation to trigger the release. The truth, like a tightly wound spring, was ready to explode. The years stretched into an unexpected 8-year vigil. I hadn't anticipated the decryption and refinement of Chiron to demand such meticulous effort. Nor did I foresee the difficulty in building the perfect, unassailable global release platform. This extended period turned my life not just into a mission, but into a living testament to Caleb's memory. I was constantly battling the urge to simply disappear, to forget the sterling name. But the code and Caleb's final, weary voice in that video clip anchored me. I lived in constant, low-grade fear of my parents. I knew Thomas Sterling was relentless. He operated under the principle that any problem, once handled, should remain buried. The bay was supposed to be the final resting place of his shame. If he ever suspected the box was retrieved, his reaction would be devastating, professional, and swift. I had to assume I was still being monitored, still a loose thread in the tightly woven tapestry of the Sterling Empire. My life revolved around the data. The only relationship I maintained was with the ghost of my brother. I analyzed his code, not just for bugs or inefficiencies, but for his emotional fingerprints. I discovered that he had laced the code with personal, time-sensitive triggers, algorithms that would only stabilize and become truly effective on specific dates linked to our childhood, ensuring that the release would be tied to human sentiment, not corporate deadlines. This reinforced my resolve. Caleb hadn't wanted a machine to save the world. He wanted a human truth to be revealed. My parents remained fixtures in the San Francisco elite. They were the epitome of stability, the face of ethical innovation. Their philanthropic foundation, the very one designed to distract from Caleb's suppressed work, had grown into a global powerhouse. Evelyn often featured in Forbes articles, discussing the importance of balancing wealth with responsibility. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. During the rare, controlled interactions I had with them, mostly via secure video calls where I maintained a blank, professional demeanor, I searched for signs of genuine repentance. I saw none. I only saw the deepening trenches of their self-deception. Once, on Caleb's birthday, I risked a short coded message to Evelyn. The Sentinel still stands. The message referenced Caleb's robot toy, the one they thought they'd drowned. She responded immediately, but with a chilling lack of comprehension. The security protocols are all current. Finn. Why the archaic reference? She was completely disconnected from the human, vulnerable core of her son's life. The robot toy, the Sentinel, had no place in the Sterling data grid. Therefore, it didn't exist in her reality. Thomas, my father, always pivoted our conversations back to profit and scale. "Your mind is sharp, Finn," he'd comment, his voice laced with the old, familiar need for control. "It's a shame you waste it on non-profitable endeavors. If you ever decide to step back into our world, your expertise could stabilize the Foundation's growth." He saw Caleb's genius as money lost, and my analytical skill as potential revenue. He never saw either of us as sons. I knew my purpose wasn't just to release the code. It was to use the code to shatter the Sterling image, to force Thomas and Evelyn to confront the moral bankruptcy of their lives. I needed an event so public, so globally resonant, that they couldn't possibly manage the press, the data, or the emotion. I needed a digital supernova that would vaporize their facade and finally reveal the beautiful, flawed humanity of Caleb Sterling to the world he wanted to save. The vigil was nearing its end. My final preparations, the decentralized platform, the coded timing mechanisms were complete. I was ready to pull the trigger and unleash the truth. The day I chose for the final launch was calculated with surgical precision, September 22nd, the anniversary of the day Caleb and I had first discussed his idea for Project Chiron. The date held no public significance, but for Caleb, it was a data point of pure human purpose. I had leased a secure, anonymous broadcast location outside of the country, ensuring the signal originated from a source Thomas Sterling couldn't immediately trace or silence. My final act was a simple one, executing a single command line that initiated the global, decentralized release of Chiron, final build onto the open-source web. The effect was instantaneous and staggering. The tech world didn't just notice Chiron, it exploded. The program, a masterpiece of algorithmic elegance, immediately began demonstrating its unparalleled predictive medical capabilities. Within hours, medical blogs, scientific journals, and even major news networks were buzzing. They focused on the speed, the accuracy, and the sheer altruism of the release. The source was listed only as the Sentinel Project, a nod to Caleb's robot toy and his final silent stand. The public narrative quickly shifted from "what is this code" to "who is the genius who gave this life-saving technology to the world for free?" The story became a global phenomenon, a rare moment of pure, selfless innovation in an industry obsessed with profit. My parents, of course, were the first to react, not with pride but with proprietary rage. I received a furious, high-security call from Thomas Sterling. His voice was a cold, controlled tremor, the sound of a man facing an existential threat to his image. "Finn," he demanded, skipping any greeting. "You know this code. This is Caleb's work. I know it. This Sentinel Project. It's theft. It's an intellectual property breach of the highest order. Get off whatever network you are on and tell me how to shut this down." "It's not theft, Father," I replied, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his panic. "It's a gift. Caleb's gift. Don't be sentimental. This code belongs to the Sterling estate. It requires our funding, our branding, our image to be trusted. You are ruining everything, the Foundation. Our legacy, I told you. This was handled. That was the key word. Handled. It was handled. Father," I pressed. "You handled the discovery of Caleb's terminal diagnosis by suppressing the only code that could have saved him. You handled the knowledge of his autism by burying the final testament to his life. You handled the truth by throwing it off the Golden Gate Bridge." Silence stretched across the secure line, heavy and toxic. He thought I was bluffing, probing. He had to be sure. "I don't know what foolish nonsense you're talking about. Finn, you are delusional. You have 2 hours to contact my legal team and surrender the access keys. or I will use every resource at my disposal to discredit both you and this Chiron. The threat was empty. I had built the platform to be decentralized. There were no keys to surrender. You can't kill an idea, Father, I said, and you can't drown the truth twice. The emotional climax, however, occurred a week later when I returned to San Francisco. I didn't announce my arrival. I simply walked into the glass house, where my parents were waiting in the sterile living room, Evelyn looking frail, Thomas rigid with anticipation. They had prepared for a negotiation, an intellectual property battle. I didn't bring lawyers or data printouts. I brought the metal lockbox and the Sentinel robot. I placed the rusted, brine-soaked box gently on the polished marble coffee table. The contrast between the antique, flawed metal and the cold, modern perfection of the room was stark. You threw this into the bay, Thomas, I said, addressing him by his first name, a deliberate act of defiance against the patriarch. You thought you had buried the evidence of Caleb's final, real act, not his accidental death, but his intentional surrender to his illness to prevent you from corrupting his code. I opened the box, revealing the little plastic robot. This is the Sentinel, the symbol of the innocence you rejected. Then, I showed them the video clip, Caleb's final heartbreaking confession. Evelyn was the first to break. She let out a choked sound, not of anger, but of a decade of suppressed agony. She rushed forward, not toward me, but toward the screen, placing a trembling hand on Caleb's image. No. The glioblastoma. He said it was just fatigue. She whispered, the elegant facade finally shattering. She collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. The quiet fear that had defined her life finally realized she had chosen her husband's lie over her son's survival. Thomas didn't move. He stood like a statue, his eyes fixed not on the video, but on the small, rusted box and the plastic toy. He saw the physical proof of his moral bankruptcy. He realized that for 8 years, he hadn't been an untouchable captain of industry. He had been a man terrified of the truth, a man who had suppressed a life-saving miracle and chosen vanity over humanity. The commanding authority, the icy control, all of it crumbled. He didn't erupt, he simply shrank. He looked at the box, then at the image of his dead son, and finally at me, the son he had dismissed as sentimental. We feared the vulnerability. Thomas finally choked out, his voice hoarse, broken. We feared the world would see the imperfection. We feared losing the image. He didn't offer a dramatic apology. His confession was quieter, heavier than any single word. He was admitting that his image was worth more than Caleb's life, his life's work, and the lives that Chiron could have saved. I stepped back, feeling the catharsis of 8 years of bottled-up truth. I wasn't there to accuse. I was there to liberate. Caleb gave the world a chance at healing, I said, quietly. Now, you have a chance at redemption. What will the sterling legacy truly be? The perfect facade had been obliterated, not by scandal or corporate failure, but by the quiet, undeniable truth brought back from the depths of the San Francisco Bay. The sterile, silent room was finally filled with the messy, painful sound of real human grief. The sterile silence of the sterling glass house was gone, replaced by the heavy, messy atmosphere of genuine grief and guilt. Thomas and Evelyn weren't fighting me. They were fighting their own shattered image. The metal box on the marble table was a mirror reflecting their deepest failure, the failure to love unconditionally. I stayed in San Francisco for a week, not as their son, but as the custodian of Caleb's truth. I wasn't there to offer easy forgiveness. I was there to demand actionable redemption. The first immediate action was the acknowledgement of Project Chiron. My parents couldn't stop the code's proliferation. It was already decentralized and global, but they could legitimize it. Thomas, once the champion of private profit, held an emergency press conference. With a face etched with decades of sudden regret, He announced the creation of the Caleb Sterling Open Source Medical Foundation. He didn't lie. He simply stated the program was his son's final, selfless gift to humanity, bypassing the fact that he'd tried to drown it. But the sheer magnitude of the subsequent funding, hundreds of millions of sterling capital channeled into maintaining and supporting Chiron globally, was his first, painful step toward genuine repentance. Evelyn's redemption was quieter, more personal. She was incapable of facing the public, but she started spending time in Caleb's soundproof lab, the room that had been his sanctuary and his prison. She didn't clean or organize. She sat in the stillness, holding the little plastic robot, the Sentinel. She finally started reading the digital remnants of Caleb's life that I had salvaged, his small, coded journal entries, detailing the anxiety of living under the perfect facade and his determination to use his mind for good. I watched them closely. They didn't revert to their perfect masks. They became two individuals visibly aged and humbled, learning to navigate the world without the shield of their public image. They were finding a new, more profound sense of honor, built not on prestige, but on compassion and transparency. Thomas stepped down from the operational side of Sterling Technologies, dedicating himself entirely to the foundation. He funded massive research grants for children with neurodevelopmental disorders, making sure that no family would ever feel the need to hide a child's brilliance or illness again. The family name was redefined. It was no longer associated with ruthless innovation, but with ethical healing. My final act was writing the story. I titled it The Sentinel's Legacy. I didn't write it to expose them publicly to the world, but to provide an honest, unvarnished history for myself and for any future generations. I detailed the suffocating pressure, the glioblastoma diagnosis, the throw of the metal box, and the silent, corrosive choice they made to value reputation over their son's life. The memoir ended with the truth I had fought 8 years to protect. A truth that transcended data and dollars. No image is worth sacrificing the soul, and no reputation is greater than the integrity of the heart. I chose to forgive them, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness was the only way to free myself from the mission and to find my own peace. The Sterling Glass house was finally occupied by people who were genuinely flawed, genuinely grieving, and genuinely loving. Years later, I received a package. Inside was a large, beautifully framed photograph. It was taken in Caleb's repurposed lab, which my parents had turned into a working museum dedicated to open-source medical research. In the photo, Thomas and Evelyn were standing side by side. Thomas, looking frail but peaceful, was holding up the little robot, the Sentinel, and Evelyn was smiling a real smile, eyes wet but clear. They had chosen love. They had chosen truth. The final, perfect image of the Sterling family was the one that was entirely, beautifully flawed. If this story resonated with you, perhaps you, too, understand the pain of prioritizing image over integrity. We invite you to share your thoughts. What does true honor mean to you? Did Thomas and Evelyn find redemption, or was their guilt simply too great? Let us know in the comments below. If Caleb's legacy, the idea that truth and compassion must always win, has touched you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and join us as we continue to share stories about family, sacrifice, and the enduring power of humanity. Thank you for listening.